Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Danon with Headstrong Hats. And this is going to be the final installment of putting together this Yingling Flight Cowboy Beer Box hat. Congratulations to all of you 28, 29 people that are following. I appreciate your patronage, and I hope you enjoy this video. We're going to add this piping around the brim of the hat with hot glue first so that it stays in place. And then I decided that I'm going to add a little extra flair to the hat this time. I've got this gray. I kind of wanted to incorporate both colors because I really do like the blue, the way it goes with that. And I was trying to decide whether I wanted to use the gray or the blue. And I wound up making the decision that I was going to use the gray and the blue. So what I'm going to do first is put this piping on the inside of the brim like this first with hot glue. And then I'll sew it in with the sewing machine using a white nylon upholstery thread. And then once that is completed, I'll be able to take the bottom part of the brim and use the elastic, and I will sew the elastic in here. Well, actually, I will sew the elastic around the brim, and then I can put these two segments together, and I will stitch the outside of the brim after that is done. And then that will wrap up the hat. Okay, so we're working with the top of the brim at this point, and this is something that I have never attempted before, but I think it's going to add a little bit of extra pizzazz to the hat without going too overboard. But what I'm going to do is use my hot glue gun and just going to go in. I'm not going to glue this portion right here because once we get all the way around, I'm going to have to tether this other end and overlap onto that so that it kind of binds it together. But I'm going to start by lining it up in the middle using the middle of the wing there, and then I'm just going to proceed to go around, and I want the piping to turn up, and if it lays flat, then it's not going to allow enough room for the crown to actually fit through. So if I leave enough of a gap to where it pushes up like this, I should be able to have enough room to slide the hat over like that, and also give enough of a gap to accommodate for the piping. Let's go ahead and start putting this together. Alright, so now that I've got that all glued to the inside of the hat, we come to this little final section where I want to overlap this so that it doesn't just leave a ragged seam right here. And my technique for doing that is to just cut a little beyond where I need it so that it will overlap. And then you'll need to separate this threading like this and remove some of this thicker thread that's in here so that it's not doubled up over on itself. And it looks like we're going to need about this much taken out, probably about 1/4 of an inch. So all you got to do is just kind of tug it out like that. Snip off the excess, and then it'll allow me to overlap onto that and make it even and flush, just like that. All right, now that I got that glued and patched up, you can't even tell where it starts and where it ends. It's time to test fit this and see if my brainstorming idea actually came to fruition without having to adjust for the size of the diameter. Yeah, it looks pretty good. I think it fits on there pretty good. So before we sew the elastic on the bottom side of the brim, we need to make some relief cuts on this intersection right here. I usually start from the middle, make a little snip, and then I just proceed to go around the hat in about 1-inch increments all the way around, and then that will allow me to fold this up, and it gives it some structure to sew this elastic onto from on this side right here. So now I have a visual crease in the bottom of the brim, so I know where to line the elastic. I usually start in the back, and then I can just follow this line all the way around so that my distance from here to here will be equal all the way around and not be wavy. Sometimes if you're not careful, the elastic will go out and then come back in and out and come back in, but this way it allows the elastic to just follow that guideline all the way around. All right, so this is one of the more technical parts of making the hats that I'm sure a lot of people aren't really interested in doing, but I feel like it just adds a little bit of professionalism to the look of the hat, and it also adds some aesthetics and also, you know, structural integrity. I like saying that word. But I've got this cheap Brother sewing machine. It's called Project Runway. I don't even know if they sell it anymore. We got it on sale for Black Friday or something at Christmas time. I've also got another heavy duty one that I bought last year from the 1950s, and I use it when I actually stitch these two brims together because it can handle thicker cardboard. But a presser foot, which is mounted on here and it helps feed stuff through, this one is flat for flat surfaces. I've got this one which is grooved so that I can fit this piping in there and it'll just kind of ride along it like a train. So I switch those feet out and it just slides in like that. And I'm going to use a white nylon upholstery thread. It's a thicker thread, and then I'll use just a regular small general purpose thread in the bobbin. And if you guys are interested in learning how to load up a sewing machine or do whatever like that, just let me know in the comments below. I'm not going to go over all that procedure because the majority of people aren't going to do it anyway. But yeah, I have this special foot that I use on the sewing machine. I set my needle all the way to the right. You can adjust it to the left, middle, and right. I set it all the way to the right so that when I feed this in here and I put my presser foot down, you see where the needle is going to land, and I want the needle to land approximately, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch away from the piping. If I put it in the middle setting, the needle is going to land too close to this seam or to the gap, and I'll risk having needle fall onto the piping, and it won't look good. And if you set it to all the way left, the needle almost hits the presser foot, just the way that it's set up. So I'm going to set my sewing machine on all the way to the right, and obviously no zigzag, and spacing all the way up on 4. So let me get the sewing machine set up with the correct thread ran through here and the bobbin and everything, and we'll jump into putting some thread around here, sewing this piping in. All right, I've got the machine threaded up. I've got the upholstery thread on top and the general purpose thread down there in the bobbin. And I just wanted to let you guys know right before I got started, I did switch out my needle. You can't really tell it. It's still sharp to the touch. But however, cardboard is detrimental to a needle, and it's always good to replace them when you're going to do probably more than 3 hats, just because the cardboard will dull the needle so quickly. So for this application, I'm going to use the denim needle, and for the other ones where it starts to get a little bit thicker, I'll bump it up to the heavy duty needle. It punctures a little bit bigger hole, but the most important thing is to have a sharp needle before you start sewing your hat together, because if the needle jams up, you're going to have to rethread the machine with a newer needle. And also, once the cardboard has a piercing through it, that's it. You know, you can't cover it up or stretch the fabric like you would if you were sewing something together. So I always make a practice run with a piece of scrap to make sure that the sewing machine is running properly and I don't have any nesting or bunching up on the back side. And yeah, I think we're ready to go. Okay, so now we've got the piping sewn in on the top of the brim. We're going to take the crown and we're going to use our hot glue gun and glue these tabs onto the inside of the brim. I like to line up my image first on the front of the hat, make sure everything is lined up like it's supposed to be here, and then I'll go ahead and start gluing in the front and then work my way one side and then the other side, and then we'll finish up in the back. All right, so there's the top. Now the next step is to go around with this blue, go around with the blue piping, and we'll do the same thing what we did with the inside, where I'll leave just a little bit of excess open on the back so that I can overlap and tie everything together. But if you can tell, this is what I would consider the bottom of the piping, just because of the way the threading is. It's more bunched up here on this side and that's smoother. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unravel this and start from the other side. I think it just gives me a better image on the piping. You see how smooth that thread is? You probably won't be able to see it in the end anyway, but just in case it starts to come out just a tad with any imperfections, you'll be able to see the fine, nice thread on the top and not the extra stitching on the back. So what I'm going to do now is proceed to go around and just kind of tack this in so that it's in place before I sew the two halves together. There, now everything is tucked in nice and neat, and the top of the hat is finished up until this point, because now, before we put these two together, we're obviously going to have to put our elastic on the inside, and I'm also going to make sure that this is going to line up like it should. I've got everything in place, and then my seams line up here, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut off the excess around the outside of the brim. All right, if you've seen any of my videos before, you might be familiar with this guy right here. I bought it, I think it's probably been 2 years ago now. It started in the pandemic whatever, when everything was in a shortage and supply and demand was high for do-it-yourself projects and stay at home and do stuff. Ended up paying about $300 for this thing, but it has got a shaft drive under here where it's all, there's no belts or anything like that. It's just straight, it's all metal, heavy duty, and it's got a strong motor on the back, which if you saw the other sewing machine, it was kind of struggling. It was trying to, as it was trying to punch through, even though it had a brand new needle on it. So with this one, you're going to see just how well it punctures through this cardboard, and it should do this one fairly easily because it's only one ply, and of course the elastic isn't going to put up much of a fight because it can just go right through it. But when I do mate the bottom to the top, you're really going to see the performance of a good sewing machine. So what I'm going to do here is, this elastic actually has two different textures on it. This is a softer texture that I would prefer to have on my skin, and this is a rougher texture. So when you're sewing it in, you want to make sure that you have the softer texture facing up, and always start with a forward stitch and then do a back stitch to kind of lock that in, and then you can proceed to sew around. Now, if you've successfully made it all the way around the hat without making it too jagged, I think I did a pretty good job here by following that indentation, the line that I had where I bent the tabs in and out. Here in the last little section, you want to kind of overlap and make sure that you're going to end up in the same, on top of the other one, because if not, you could be too far out or too far in and it'll leave you with a gap. So at this point, you can pull this extra thread from the starting stitch out of the way and make sure everything is lined up perfectly, and we'll finish up this last 1.5 inches. Like that, and I'll give it a little back stitch here, throw it back in forward, and then I'm going to swivel the hat, and I want to run one stitch straight this way so that I can kind of tether these two pieces together. I don't know if you can see it. I want to tether these two pieces together so that it's just not flapped open. So I might have to run it forward just a hair. Might do one more stitch. Then let me swivel it, and then I can come straight forward like this and kind of tie these two together. Like that, and then I'll put it in reverse, and I'll go straight back down and put it in drive and reverse, and that will lock that in, and I can lift up my presser foot and remove, trim this off. We'll kind of tidy things up here by removing some of these extra threads and get a little bit closer on this also. So as you can see how well I was able to go around this indentation as a guide by flipping those tabs up. Kind of got a little squirrely here, but the good news is I used a black thread, and you'll never be able to tell, but yeah, it looks good. And like I said, if you this will help support different size heads. Should be about 26 inches with the full circumference, but as you fold, you could fold these tabs up and then the elastic would still give way to where it would accommodate somebody with a larger head. Yeah, it's still pretty comfortable. All right, so let's finish this up by putting the two halves together. Here in the very final stage of putting this stuff together, I used to use a Super 77 on both sides like this. I'd spray it on here and then treat this also, and then risk misaligning something as I put it together. So I found out that it's safer just to use a bead of hot glue right around this portion of the crown and the brim, whatever you want to call it. Get those terms mixed up a lot, but I try to make a descriptive word for what I'm talking about. But I'm just going to put some hot glue right around this area here, and then I can put this on, and then the stitching is going to hold it together on the outer perimeter. But if you're not going to sew and you want to just use some Super 77 to hold all this stuff together, I'm sure it'll be fine for some degree of time. But for now, what we are going to do is we're going to put the glue around here and then stitch it together. So for all intents and purposes, that's basically it, except for putting the stitching around there. So let me clean up some of this crap and get it out of the way, and then we'll get to putting the stitching in. Now, one thing I do like about this sewing machine is it's a straight stitch only. It cannot do zigzag. It can't move left and right like the other one did. It's only got a single hole down here in the bottom, but this presser foot is narrower, and it allows me to get closer to the piping on this side. And I don't need that one that bridges over the piping on this one, just because this will ride along the edge just perfectly and give me a good guide to make a straight line around the outside. Once again, we're going to start in the back, in the middle of this design here. I'm going to put one stitch in it, then reverse it to lock that in, and then I'll go right back to going forward and hope for the best as we proceed to go around the hat, that I can actually cut, or that I can actually sew a straight line without too many stops and starts. And wish me luck. Hate this part. Let's get her going. As you're narrowing down to the end, you might want to use hand cranks to make sure that you can line up these threads from where you started. Once they overlap, you can back it up, pierce through the same hole that it was in, go forward, pierce through the same hole, that should lock it in. Lift up your presser foot, we'll remove this excess thread. And that's all there is to it. That's the bottom and the top. Thank you guys so much for watching and checking out how I build these hats. I try to keep everything transparent and let you know exactly the process that goes into it. And please stay tuned and subscribe and like this video so you can see more later.